The next thing that I want to take a look at here are shortcuts. And this is something that I think can make a really, really big difference. Again, that very first version of the page designer that I showed you, if you wanted to edit anything, you had to click. Clicking was essential. And that's still true to a degree with the most recent versions of Apex. But you can try to minimize that by learning some shortcuts. I will say that when you first try to force yourself to use shortcuts, it is kind of painful because I find that I just, when I'm trying to force myself to learn shortcuts for any builder, for any tool, I just remove my mouse. I don't have a mouse to use. I can't use it. I need to figure out how to do things with just my keyboard. It's extremely painful, but it forces you to learn. So I understand that that can kind of stink. So what shortcuts are available? Well, in the upper right-hand corner of the page designer is this wonderful little help region. And this help region has more information than just shortcuts. And actually, there's a wonderful little tutorial here, getting started with the page designer. I would encourage you to click on that and read that. If you want documentation about the version of Apex that you are in, if you happen to be in Apex version 5.1, come up here, click documentation. It's going to take you to the documentation for Apex version 5.1. If you happen to be in 20.1, it'll take you to the documentation for 20.1. And so I find that's incredibly convenient. But we're going to focus here a second on shortcuts. Before I actually go look at the Apex screen, I'm just going to mention one last thing down here at the bottom. In the bottom right-hand corner, there are two types of shortcuts. There's just a key press, and you just press, a combination of keys and it's done. But sometimes we can have a sequence of shortcuts that we press ultimately that allows us to create a shortcut or to invoke a shortcut. And for a lot of the Apex shortcuts in the builder, it's Control/, right? So we'll do Control/, and in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen, you'll actually see this little gray box pop up saying, yep, I hear you. You're starting a sequence shortcut, but you need to enter more information before I actually do the thing that you want to do. So let's take a look at that. So I want to show you that right now. So if you focus on the bottom left-hand corner of my screen, I'm taking my keyboard, I'm doing Control/, and right as I do that, you can see that Apex says, yep, I'm listening. And now if I press a random key, like my down arrow, actually it wasn't really listening for down arrow keys. What happens if I press space? No, that didn't trip it up. What happens if I press / again? You can see that it finally disappeared. So there's certain keys that will influence whether or not are even possible to have a shortcut bound to, and we'll toggle that component there. The shortcuts, yes.
Quick question. The shortcuts section doesn't look like it's there in 18.2. Thought on that?
Yeah, the shortcuts should be here. I think shortcuts really came about, I think in 18.1, I think shortcuts really became a big thing. Pro tip, if you want to include shortcuts in your applications, you should really have a look at the apex.actions interface. It has built-in shortcut support. So you can even do all of the things that you're seeing here are using the actions interface for the most part. And you can do all of this stuff in your apps without having to re-implement everything. Okay. So you can see there are actually several sequence shortcuts that we can use. And most all of them begin with Control/. Some of them not necessarily, but most of them begin with Control/. Some Alt-Shifts, but yeah. So which one of these are important? Which ones do I use at any with any regularity? The ones that I like is just the delete key. to delete a node. I use that all the time. Alt F8 is just to save the page. Alt F7 will save the page and then turn around and run the page. One of the things that you do in Apex very regularly when you want to add a new feature, a new report, a new form, a new thing, it's quite often that you will create a new page. So Control slash, then hands off the keyboard, C, hands off the keyboard, P, and then it will actually create a new page. And the other thing that you can do is you can actually really control what's going on in the layout view. If you have extremely complex pages with many regions and many items and many buttons, and sometimes we'll even have regions and regions and regions and regions, right? And you want to modify items that's in that most nested region. And that layout view, when you first look at it, you're thinking, this is a big giant mess. How am I going to do this? Well, it turns out that display from here and display from page is your golden ticket when you have very complex pages with several regions and lots of components. If you just want to focus in on a particular region, you want the perspective of the layout view to be only on that one region, display from here is your friend. Let me show you that. So let's say, for example, I want to deal with top customers, but maybe also in this case I don't, but maybe I had a whole bunch of items and things that were in my way. Well, Control slash DH, you can see that it's now displaying only that region. And if I want to go back and display from the page, Control slash DT, it'll go back and it'll just display the whole page. Now, it turns out if you don't want to use shortcuts, you can actually just click this little zoom and it does the same thing. And I can click back to kind of stop zooming. So that's kind of a pretty cool feature that you can use when you want to focus in on a page to kind of edit what's going on. So let me go ahead and just focus in on this one region here for a second. And it turns out there are even more controls for this layout view. It's this layout view, a lot of engineering time has been spent trying to make this thing awesome. And I think the Apex team did a pretty good job. So what's up with the layout view? What are all the different controls that it can do? Well, first we can toggle what is displayed, and we can even focus in on specific regions. And it allows you to kind of reposition and restructure your page in a very natural way. When I mean natural, I mean click and dragging and moving rather than having to go into the properties and change the sequencing and the ordering and display new row, display new column, right? It automatically adjusts and updates all of those properties for us if we just use it. So let me show you a couple things here that I think can be extremely helpful when it comes to the layout view. That menu that you just saw on the screen actually originates from right here. And so notice that display from here is disabled because I'm zoomed in on this particular component. When I say display from page, you can see it, I kind of have that similar behavior. So let me go ahead and actually zoom back in using this. If I want more space, I can expand, and I can see expand is Alt F11. And I could say, Alt F11, and it should expand. Or I can use the expand restore button that is here. So there are some things for me to click on, but the Apex team, trying to not inundate us with buttons everywhere, has tried to consolidate as many actions as they can into this menu. So what other things does this do that are helpful? One that I really like can be, a lot of times you have all this noise of all these empty positions that you're not using. Sometimes it's helpful to have them, sometimes it's not. So I could say hide empty positions, and all those different empty positions just disappear. They're the things that I'm not using. Now, if I want to click and drag a component into that position, well, now I can't. But if I'm just editing an already complex page that has items and components where I want them, then this can be extremely helpful to simplify what it is that I'm looking at. And of course, we can toggle that back here. Maybe if I'm working on only items and I don't care about viewing buttons, so I can come in here and I can say, hide all my buttons. I'm not worried about button stuff right now. I just want to worry about positioning items and regions. Maybe I have several nested regions and I don't care about items and I don't care about buttons either. I can come in here and I could say, well, hide my items and my buttons. And now I can just, I'm only positioning regions. So when you have several nested regions, this can be extremely helpful. For simple pages, not necessary. For more complex pages, this is absolutely fantastic. On that note, so let me go ahead and zoom out, and there we go. And I'll kind of get my buttons and items back. One thing to keep in mind is that be aware that you might hide buttons here, so you're not seeing them in the layout view. You might have to come back and toggle those back on, and I'll go ahead and toggle my items back on, so now I can also see my items. The other thing that I want to mention, which I think is absolutely fantastic and gets overlooked, is this thing down here. It's I kind of refer to as the component drawer. There's these components that we can kind of quickly grab and add to our page. And I'll be honest with you, I don't really like the click and drag functionality from here. I mean, I could grab a classic report and drag it somewhere onto my page. I find that that's kind of clunky, and it's kind of hard to get it exactly where you want to be. But if we look at this page and, let's just say I want a classic report after top customers, but before top products, I could click and drag it here. Another way that I could do it, which I find can be helpful, is if you right click and you say add to, and then you just start answering questions. Yes, this is mouse intensive, but it is very natural. So where do I want to add this? Well, relative to top customer, or relative to the content body, I want to find top customers. And relative to top customers, where do I want to put this? Well, do I want to put this before or after? Do I want a new row before? Do I want a new row after? Or no, I just want a column right after that. And so what should happen is that I've kind of added a new report, and it's been added after top customers. It was added, but I can't see it. But I can use that to actually add some components. I should be seeing it right there. I can see that it wants to show me, but or I can see that it allocated the space, but I don't see the region, so that's unfortunate. So the other thing that I want to mention, this is like not necessarily an Apex thing. I'm a gamer. I play video games, and actually one of my favorite games that I played for a long time was Tribes, where you scoot around and you skate around and fly jetpacks and shoot people. And one of the things in that game is they had this really fantastic communication system, and it always started with V, and then you could say VGS to like say something to communicate with other people. And but there's that sequence that you had to type out. So what we would do is, if you have a nice keyboard, oftentimes keyboards will have, and especially gaming keyboards, will have macro keys that you can set up, which will do those things. So now what I can do, instead of having to type VGS while I'm trying to skate around and play the game, I could just press macro key 1 and it'll just say that thing. Well, using an IDE or using a builder like using a tool like the Apex Builder, we might be able to leverage some of those same features. So let me show you what I mean. So I have a couple macros. Let me go ahead and undo. All right, let me just reload this page. I'm going to use a macro to do some things that are several steps and might take a long time for me to do, if even with shortcuts, or it's several steps to make it happen. So if I wanted to make a new page, I can do Control/CP, and that would make a new page. But I do this so often that I want to expedite this. So I'm just going to press macro key 1, and it just opens up create page. So I'll do that again. So I'm not clicking anything. I'm just going to say macro 1, and then you can see that a new page opens up. And actually, if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, right, I'm going to go ahead and press this now, and you can see the shortcut instantly registers, and it shows the thing. Maybe I want to work on this region, and I want to zoom in on it. So I'm going to press macro key 2. Okay, and we can see that macro key 2 has kind of allowed me to kind of focus in. Well, macro key 2. There we go. It's allowed me kind of to focus in on that region. And if if it's minimized, then it will maximize it. If it's maximized, it will then minimize it. So those were several shortcuts kind of combined into one macro. And I think that can be extremely helpful.
Okay, Tyson, back on that, when you added the other region after top customer, a couple of people said you may need to add the region a name, give the region a name. That might have been the error there.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that was an error, but I was expecting to see it visualized in the layout editor. All right. So the other thing that I want to talk about, this is something I see on the forums fairly regularly. I have an Apex application, and I want to have it open multiple times, or maybe I want to be in the builder several times for some reason. Sure, there's reasons why you might want to do that. Normally with your own applications, you might want to have it open as 3 or 4 different users. Maybe you're testing security and privileges, and you want to see, as you're making these changes, you want to see, these how it impacts these different types of users. So there's a problem in that the way that Apex works is it uses a cookie to manage your session. So if you have a valid session, it means you have a valid session cookie, and your browser can only have that one cookie for the Apex session. So if you try to log in as somebody else, well, you overwrite the cookie, and now your previous session is killed. Or rather, if you try to interact with it in any way, it's going to take you back to the login screen because there's no valid cookie for that session anymore. There's a couple ways to get around this. The simplest way that you can do in every browser without having to download anything is private browsing. Private browsing has its own separate cookie or set of cookies. It doesn't share cookies with other windows. And so if I come here and I can, actually I'll be in my sample database application, Control-Shift-P, log into this application, and now I should be able to log in as somebody else. It's the exact same application, but what's important is that if I click a link or do something here, I still work and function. Okay, so I could potentially be logged in twice. But what if I want to be logged in 3 times or 4 times or 10 times? Well, private browsing won't allow you to do that. But what we can leverage instead, there is a wonderful Firefox extension called MultiAccount Containers. It kind of takes this idea of segmenting your browser tabs or your browser windows, your browser tabs, and each tab can be kind of assigned its kind of own workspace, its own level of isolation. Let's check that out. So first thing that I just wanted to point out is that in Firefox, that's the little private window, so you have a different session. In Chrome, this is the incognito window. You can have a separate session in there. But I want to talk about multi-account containers. So you can see that in Firefox, if you have multi-account containers enabled, each color is kind of its own level of isolation. So I could theoretically be logged in four different times, one for just my browser, one for the pink, one for the blue, and one for the yellow. And so this is kind of cool. Let me just show you this. All I have to do is come over here to multi-account containers, and I'll say fire up a new session. And you can see I get a new tab. This tab is completely isolated from the other. So if I try to run my sample application, you can see that it says session 1 here. And if I come back over here to my application and I try to click on something, it still works. And I could, if I open up session 2, it's going to create another tab for another level of isolation. Now I'm logged. This is the third session that I have in this app. And so the reason why this works is because every tab is isolated and they do not share cookies. Apex uses cookie-based authentication, so this allows us to be logged into the same application multiple times as different users. You do not need to open 3 or 4 different, completely different browsers. I've seen that before. You open up IE, Firefox, Chrome, you go download Opera or Safari or something to have a, you don't need to do that. I mean, if you want to go ahead, that would also work because they're different browsers, so they have, they don't share cookies. But I think this is a little more elegant way of dealing with that. And it's just a plugin that you can go download. And it's called MultiAccount Containers. If you just Google Firefox MultiAccount Containers, you'll be golden.